Hello, my name is Peter Cinnamon, and you're very welcome to a podcast all about the Irish League, where there is only one place to start, and that is, after months in the making, the Cliftonville takeover has collapsed. For now, the Toronto Investment Group have walked away. Is there still a scenario where it could be recovered? Where on earth does this leave the Reds now, moving forward? And is Cliftonville a club facing internal civil war? We'll take a deeper look into that, as well as all the latest news off the field, including some big moves in the January transfer window, as well as some marquee signings walking through the door at Irish League clubs. Plenty to sink your teeth into on this, your latest weekly edition of Kick and Match. So we're starting this podcast with a little bit of news which is broken just as we've sat down and started to record. It's been bubbling underneath in the Irish League for a long time, and this whole saga when it comes to Cliftonville, investment, specifically investment from the Toronto Investment Group, it is now over. And joining me here to talk through this, as well as everything else that's been going on in the Irish League for the past 7 or so days, it's Stephen Alexander. Big news.
Yeah, what a way to start, Peter. That's brings an end to what has been a long-running and sort of unedifying spectacle, really, in recent weeks. It's not been pleasant reading to be sort of looking in from the outside and seeing sort of the effect that the fallout of that the takeover talks has had at Cliftonville. So hopefully now, from Cliftonville's point of view, they will be able to draw a line under that and start to look forward with some positivity.
There's only one place to start. It's a statement. You can read it too. That has just popped up onto the Cliftonville website, where they say, having shared this information with club members earlier this evening, this is Monday night when this is coming out, the management committee of Cliftonville Football Club provide wider support with the following update. We have been advised that the Toronto Investment Group has withdrawn its investment proposal to acquire ownership of the club with immediate effect. This brings an end to a process that has involved many months of discussion, engagement, and detailed scrutiny by the management committee and its professional advisors. Throughout this period, the management committee has acted in what it believes to be the best interests of the club and its members, applying careful governance, legal and financial consideration to the proposal, while the board remained open to securing long-term investment that could strengthen Cliftonville's future. It also became increasingly concerned in recent months that the protracted nature of the takeover approach and the tensions that emerged as a result, both within the club and among the wider membership. Members will recall that the EGM was recently adjourned. This decision was not taken lightly by the chair of the meeting. The adjournment rose due to frustrations among many in the membership that the management committee was unable to secure key information from TGI that members reasonably required in order to make an informed decision of this magnitude. Following the meeting, the committee continued to seek information which was not provided by TGI. There's a whole lot more in this statement, but pretty much coming from TGI, they are out. This has been a real protracted saga is the only word. You look back here, it was only April last year. 3 Canadian businessmen alongside Connor Devine presented a deal which was worth 2.5 up front and 10 million over 10 years. That's what was proposed, and it got 88% approval by club members. Now, you can hear there's meetings ending before it all gets sorted out, and you've seen it online. Fans have been frustrated. Maybe they'll look at this as hope, but if you're a fan of the Reds, after all this belief and potential, this has to feel like a gut punch tonight.
Yeah, I mean, those I remember seeing that at the time. Those were sort of eye-watering figures, Peter, weren't they? In terms of an Irish League club and in terms of investment in an Irish League club. But you know that these are the people working behind the scenes for Cliftonville, the officials. You know, they are the custodians of the club. You know, they have to make sure that sort of every I is dotted and every T is crossed, and they seem to have been sort of frustrated by a lack of answers to the questions that they've asked, and they've probably feel now that they've had no alternative but to draw a line under this, and whether this will sort of rumble on, the discontent will rumble on from this, I will remain to be seen. But certainly, the Red supporters, they'll probably be thinking maybe this is an opportunity missed. But who knows how these things work out? These things, it could be something brilliant. It could be a total disaster. The Cliftonville officials, as custodians of the club, they will undoubtedly have taken what they feel is in the club's best interest. But we'll see how this one plays out.
There has been serious concern for months, at least from those within the hierarchy at Cliftonville. You can even look back in August when the chairman, Kieran Harding, paused negotiations. There was an EGM in September, and members then rejected any move to revote on the takeover. They had then set up, there was talk of this committee to review the proposal. Then in September, there's been numerous calls from fans groups saying Kieran Harding, the chairman, needs to stand down. They've also been asking for the removal of other their board members. Continued. January there, just this time last week. In fact, that meeting ends with significant disagreement, and now TGI say we're done. But there's so much more to this, because what did people high up within Cliftonville see or not see? What were they missing? And time will prove, were they right not to jump in here? Was this in fact the wrong move? Did they need more detail? Or is this a situation where people who were for this whole takeover, when they realised that perhaps their position in the club was not going to be retained in the same way, did they not see this as a good move for them? We just do not have enough information, and it feels as though speculation around both those two feelings are going to be rife. No matter what side you're on, it kind of doesn't matter, because it's gone, and Cliftonville are now, I think it's not too dramatic to say that they're left picking up the pieces here.
Yeah, it's obviously going to make things very different. At a time, make things very difficult, I should say. At a time, of course, Peter, as well, where they have been sort of struggling. When I say struggling on the pitch, I don't mean they're in a relegation battle or anything like that there, but they've been losing key players, and this has been a sort of a recurring theme over the past couple of seasons there. Jim Magilton has brought some tremendous players to the club, and unfortunately Cliftonville haven't been able, for a variety of reasons. Some of those players have seen their futures lie elsewhere, and that's going on right up until now in this current January transfer window. So we have to hope from Cliftonville's perspective that all the fuss and all the noise eventually settles down, because it's bound to, no matter how much Jim and the players say it's nothing to do with us, it doesn't affect us. I think, Peter, it's unavoidable, when there's that sort of amount of murmuring going on in the background. I think that has to seep its way down into the playing side of the club as well, and I think that's probably a detrimental effect as well.
What will Cliftonville do from here? At the minute, they are where they were. They're in a situation now where they don't know, are they going to push on? Could there be other people that they look for investment? I'm sure fans are probably asking all the same questions that we are. Where does this leave Jim Magilton and co? Do they see Cliftonville as a team that they can bring forward? Clearly, they've been frustrated over the past 2 seasons that every great player they have has usually been snapped up, or they've lost them for one reason or the other. Do they need to look at a different model where they're more developing to try and sell on, to keep up with other teams and keep up towards the top of the table, being there for trophies? Is this a sign that Cliftonville, in the same way that we've seen in recent times, their rivals and Crusaders, is without investment, is the league going to pass them by? Some people will believe that. So a massive twist in the tail, which felt like it was going to be one of the big, if you're a Red fan, of course, happy moments, triumphant moments of the season has now ended in disquiet, disagreement, and discontent overall from the fan base. It's this is going to rumble on.
Yeah, there was a lot of fanfare, Peter, when this was first announced, and this sort of seemed to tick a lot of boxes for Cliftonville supporters. Um, Again, I can absolutely imagine that this has been scrutinised with a fine tooth comb by Cliftonville's officials, and if this is the outcome of it, it may not be sort of necessarily what everyone wanted, but as we've seen, there were some sort of fairly heated discussions, contrasting opinions on both sides of the debate, as it were. So this is how it has all played out, and it will be interesting to see, as you say, where things lie in the future.
I think this will have an impact or will leave reverberations throughout the league. Will other fans or will other clubs be as openly optimistic or jump at an opportunity like this without the details being clear first? Because it was a very open, a very public. Here we go, and now months and months and months and months later, it's oh no, and it's not only left the club without the future that they were hoping to be, but they've left relationships between the hierarchy of the club and fans in tatters. The team is left in a really bad situation because of the inability to invest or the pausing of investment in team building. And what was supposed to be a triumphant moment in the history of Cliftonville, an historic one to even consider selling on or giving it over to somebody else, is now ending in total internal division. This will not be the last time we talk about the situation at Cliftonville. There's not been a lot of games happening in Ballymena recently, has there?
No, it's definitely it's been unusual times, Peter, around the showgrounds or the Atlantis Arena, as I've retitled it, on account of it seemingly always being submerged underwater in recent times. I was up actually, funnily enough, Peter, on Saturday morning before the latest postponement of the Portadown game. I happened to be up there in the morning because my son was playing a match on the 3G pitch at the showground. So I went and had a look at the main arena. I didn't actually set foot on it, but I saw it. And I have to say, Peter, that the ground staff had done an absolutely Herculean job at that stage in getting the pitch from the absolute swamp it had been in midweek when the Irish Cup game against Larne was called off. They had got it into maybe a position where, to the untrained eye, such as someone like myself, I believed it was playable. That was maybe around about 9 a.m. Unfortunately, while my son's team was playing, there was another sort of fairly hefty downpour between 9 and 10, and that probably sort of put the final nail in the coffin as far as Saturday's match was concerned. I think when the referee came to look at it, he postponed. I think maybe, Peter, the general consensus from the Ballymena perspective was that it was maybe viewed as a bit of a harsh postponement because, as I say, the difference from midweek until Saturday was remarkable. But it's one of those things that I never envy a referee the task of inspecting a pitch, because I think, in my opinion, the only thing worse than a game not getting started is it starting and then not being completed.
Mm. Is this becoming a significant problem for Ballymena? Because the one at Glentoran has definitely been one that comes to my mind, where if there's a wreck of rain, you're thinking it's probably not going to be on. Ballymena is now entering that category as well. I do remember a couple of years ago, maybe it was the last season where David Jeffrey was in charge, where that pitch was a state. Work has been done on it, has it not?
Yeah, there's been work has been carried out at considerable expense to the Mid and East Antrim ratepayer, a number of times over the years. I think, Peter, as recently as last season, I think Niffle had sort of been saying, "Well, look, going to have to get your house in order here." There, I think they were sort of, maybe hinting at there might be some sort of penalties put in place, whether that be that Ballymena would have to maybe play a match an alternative venue or what, I don't know. But I think it may all sort of be coming to an end, because as far as I recall seeing in the local press, a wee while back. I think that the plan is now for a 4G pitch to be installed in the main arena. But again, whether that's dependent upon funding or what stage that's at, I'm not sure. But I think the long term plan is to go for the artificial surface. I think obviously that's been sort of helped in recent years by the stock cars no longer being involved at the showgrounds. But so it's funny, Peter. I did laugh at it. Got quite a few comments on social media whenever the news of the latest postponement appears on Facebook or something. There's plenty of comments along the lines of, "You got to blame the stock cars now," which does make me chuckle. They haven't been there for a number of years.
Well, people keep saying, "Oh, it was better when the stock cars were going around." It's like as if that somehow had an impact. It does feel like we're getting numb to how many of these games are getting called off due to weather. It's not the only game this weekend which did get called off. Sunday there, Glentoran against Cliftonville also fell foul to the weather. Interestingly, if you look at the table when it comes to games played, it feels like it's evened up ever so slightly, unless, of course, you are Cliftonville, who have only played 22 games. They've got a lot to catch up on. I'm sure some way, somehow, it will all happen, but it's when. It's just going to be flat out Tuesday games, and it's a different thing altogether, but usually when I'm doing this podcast, I'm saying, look, if there's a game on a Tuesday night, you're unlikely to, well, majority of people are unlikely to hear this, but we're in a situation where there is no Tuesday night game because of this recent amber warning. Here we are on a Monday evening recording this. The game between Ballymena and Enfield, it's already moved to the Wednesday.
Yeah, I'm quite pleased to see Nifl took fairly swift, decisive action on that. They made a good early call on it because certainly I think the forecast for Tuesday is absolutely horrendous. So good to see that call being made early. Again, you mentioned it there. I think Ballymena are going to be in a scenario now where that'll be pretty much Tuesday, Saturday, almost nearly right through to the split at the end of March. That these postponements, they may help, they may hinder, they may do a bit of both. On one side, it gives a few of those injured players maybe an opportunity to get a bit closer to fitness. But by the same token, the stop-start nature of the past few weeks has done nothing really to help Oran Kearney build up any sort of momentum.
We can slightly flip reverse this week with some of the games being on. The games that were on, maybe not sparking the imagination in the same way that other ones would. And it is late January, which means transfers and everything else is very much to the fore. And obviously there's been a huge amount of transfers in Ballymena. Interestingly enough, and I didn't totally expect this, Glentoran, as much as what happened, whatever it was, a week and a half ago, has somewhat faded their title charge. They are restocking, be it that they think this is still one last roll of the dice to try and really nail down Europe and maybe sneak up towards a title race, or they're reloading for next year. But they have really replenished their stocks. Two of them from Crusaders. We talked last week about how Jonathan Rourke, captain there for 9 years, had the whole statement saying he doesn't want to stay. Out you go. He's gone to Glentoran. With him, so has the veteran Ross Clark, which fills a role for them on the wing. I don't expect him to be a starter, but a nice rotational piece. Can he still deliver at the levels we've seen previously with both the Blues and Crusaders? I think there's a question mark over that. But the real headline grabbing signing, and I didn't see too much rumours around this before it was nailed on. It was hold on a second, what's happening here? Aaron McAneff, Shamrock Rovers to Glentoran. It's a piece of the pitch that they had bodies, but I guess no one has quality of this level and the pedigree. That's a massive signing at this level.
Absolutely, Peter. And as you say, I think the thing about that particular transfer, it caught so many people just completely on the hop. It's normally in the Irish League and social media and coming from one side of the bargain or the other club that's involved, usually it leaks out in some way. Oh, we're interested in such and such, or so and so's going from us to such and such a club. that one there, the Iron Magnificent seemed to just come from absolutely nowhere. And as you say, it gives Glentoran real quality in a vital area of the pitch. I mean, he's had a very good career, and obviously the latter part of it spent at the club, who have been the dominant force in the League of Ireland in recent seasons. So on the face of it, Glentoran appear to have had a very good January transfer window so far, with some of the names that they've been able to add. And as you say, even the quality and the experience there of Jarlath O'Rourke and Ross Clark. It's one of those, I think, the Jarlath O'Rourke thing, it's always the way that it's painted sometimes there. Probably if you were in his position, it's, your contract's coming up at the end of the season. You maybe just want to try and sort of weigh up your options and keep your options open, and see probably what happens with your own club first. Obviously, they're struggling at the foot of the table, but then it's one of those things, simply because maybe a player decides, well, look, no, obviously you've offered me a new contract. I'm not going to sign that straight away. Well, then sometimes maybe that can be painted as, oh, he doesn't want to stay, whereas all maybe a player is doing is trying to sort of keep his options open. So it was probably sort of not maybe the end to a fairly illustrious career at Seaview that he would have liked, but big blow for Crusaders to lose two players of that experience, but certainly two very good additions to Glentoran's squad.
Particularly Jarlath O'Rourke, not only was he the captain, but he could fill in along what had been a sketchy back line. So you take out O'Rourke from that, both going forward and when he was doing bits and pieces at centre back, it leaves them even further depleted. Concern, would you say, around Crusaders, because they've been on and off. They're down near the bottom of the league. They're two big cogs gone. I know Ross Clark wasn't playing week in and week out for them. Um, does it suggest that they are simply not the club that, I know, based on the past few seasons, they don't feel like the club that we all have known for the past 2 decades? But this feels like a real moment of change, that these players are saying it's time to move on. They do bring in Thomas Maguire, but the identity just seems so different.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, psychologically, I think that the loss of O'Rourke and Clark, I think that's a real hammer blow for Crusaders, because they've struggled for experienced bodies. They've been young and keen and eager and quick, but with that, obviously, with having such a young team, naive at times as well, probably defensively. Just to be looking now, I know obviously Declan Cadell, well, he's got another week or so to reinforce that squad, but to lose sort of two of his tried and trusted lieutenants who've kind of been through a lot of the success of the Stephen Baxter years, that's a big blow for Crusaders to cope with at this stage.
And experience, that was the one thing you could see they have been lacking, and to lose that, especially just the amount of games that they've played in the Irish League, doesn't help when you are in that scrap in that part of the league. It's funny, Jonathan Rourke had been touted for both Glentoran and Ballymena United, and you might say those are the two teams that are maybe the best stocked at wingback throughout the league. I'm sure you wish he was lining up in Sky Blue either now or potentially in the summer, which had been rumoured he was penciled in for.
Yeah, I'd heard those rumours, which and obviously whenever the thing came out, Peter, that he hadn't signed he wouldn't, he hasn't signed the contract he'd been offered at Crusaders, then possibly the obvious inference from that is, well, maybe that's because he's maybe signed a pre-contract somewhere else. But then when he was available, he obviously hadn't done that, because then whenever he was made available to other clubs, Glentoran came straight in to complete the deal there and then, rather than wait to the summer. So a shrewd piece of business, I think, on Declan Devine's part there.
You look elsewhere, it had been talked about a lot in the past week or so. Jack Keeney adds to the defensive exodus out of Cliftonville. He's gone away to Texas Corpus Christi FC. I couldn't tell you what division, but he's going to have a nice time in America. All going well. We talked about Thomas Maguire going from Dungannon to Crusaders. There's been a few more movements throughout the league. I don't think this happened by the time we were recording. Adam Frizzell goes from the last team he's playing for was Derry. That's a winger who's went to Linfield. We'll see what kind of level he can play at. He's got a bit of history in Scotland. You've been busy. Have Ballymena been in this transfer window? It's slightly slowed down just in the past week, if you could say that. But the McElhenney brothers, they've come together, reconciled once again.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those. It's strange, just sort of how that sometimes happens in football. You know, maybe siblings tend to end up in the same place. Obviously, an area that Oran has identified in bringing Sheehan, a central, very very experienced central defender. I've seen him play quite a bit for Glentoran. Um, a good solid performer. Obviously, sort of maybe age not terribly much on his side, but presumably Oran's looking at that. He needs an organizer in there at the back, just an experienced head. I think Peter, just with the sort of maybe with the situation that Oran has inherited, and I'll talk a wee bit about this here sort of as well in due course. You know, the injuries and the situation that he's inherited. I think he's maybe had to sort of go for maybe a bit more short term thinking than he would maybe ideally have liked. You know, probably at this stage, he might have been thinking, well, look, I would imagine here Ballymena will have the wherewithal to climb the table, you know, and we'll try and sort of get a few building blocks in place for next season. I think he's probably realised now that there's still a fairly big job to be done between now and the end of this season to avoid getting into waters that Ballymena unfortunately have been familiar with in recent seasons, but which they wouldn't want to be back into.
Yeah, there's a lot of the Ballymena story which I'm keen to talk to you about. Maybe the one transfer which strangely maybe gone under the radar, but it is quite perplexing, some might say, is that after all these additions, there's been plenty of players leaving Coleraine, one of them being Ronan Doherty, and Lorne is his destination. Plenty of people online saying, why would a quote-unquote title rival help strengthen Lorne? But maybe you could have seen this just to add an extra body to Lorne. He doesn't sound as or feel like someone that's going immediately into that midfield.
Yeah, well, I mean, he did start on Friday night. I covered that game. I was interested to see if he would start or if he was on the bench. I think, Peter, you and I on this podcast have talked about Ronan Doherty before. I think there's a bit of a Ronan Doherty fan club, I think, between you and I. You know, I think when you look at signing players, a manager is going to think to himself, well, how is this guy going to fit into what we do? And I would imagine that when Gary Haverin found out that Ronan Doherty was available, I mean, I think it was the proverbial no-brainer, wasn't it? Because for a team which plays possession-based football like Larne do, a player like Doherty is just what they need. Particularly, I think possibly maybe Mark Randall's maybe going to be sidelined for a wee bit. Yeah, so that maybe came into Gary's thinking as well. But, you know, Ronan Doherty, a player who's really comfortable on the ball. He keeps the play moving, which is what Larne's game is all about. Move, pass, pass, move. It's terrific. He's got great set piece delivery. Like, he really does tick a lot of boxes. I mean, as you said there about coming from a title rival, you could be looking at the sort of unusual scenario where a player goes from not getting a sniff at the team who are in second in the league to becoming an important component in the team who look likely to win it.
He does exactly what Lorne like in a player. He has the experience, he gets stuck in, can easily build up from deep, and it's all those qualities that they've decided they want to bring him in, and has had a year, because he was obviously brought in, I think last January window, to go to Coleraine. So he's had that experience full time. When Lorne come calling, you're probably thinking, if it's not working out for you, Coleraine, what a nice move for that to go on. But we've talked about all those transfers because what's I feel like has been put under the spotlight over the past week. It's not like this is a new conversation, but with all these new players coming in, being signed, wages being handed out, money in this league, where are we? We're hearing about all this investment. Glenavon looked to be the next team that could get significant investment. There's a meeting between members, senior members in that club and others, and how quick that could be might be surprising if that is just at the rubber stamping phase. But we've seen a lot of success for Carrick in the past week, highlighting all the investment they've got. Ballymena have obviously decided they're back up at the table, and they've been putting plenty of dough into their squad as well. When you see the McAneff transfer and you see the Coyle transfer going from Shelburne up to Coleraine, you can see League of Ireland fans going, what is going on? And I know these are not players right in their pomp, 22, 23, ready to take over the world. But these are still players that would be sought after in the League of Ireland. And for them to be attracted away from that isn't because of their love for Club X or Club Y. It may suit them from a lifestyle point of view. But you must admit, if we're sitting here in 2-3 years, maybe 18 months, and there's chat of worries financially, which, you know, there often can be in the background of Irish League circles. It's not like there hasn't been warning
Yeah.
signs.
No, this is true. I think there has been, yeah, certainly a bit of a sea change there, hasn't there? You know, when you see the players coming from the League of Ireland, and we're talking names there, as you say, Aaron McNiff, Mark Coyle. You know, these are. I don't follow the League of Ireland closely, but even, you know, whenever those names were being mentioned, I'm like, whoa, these guys are appearing in the Irish League now. Um, Again, as you say, like everything, Peter, in football and probably in sport and in life in general, now it boils down to money, doesn't it? You mentioned there the Glenavon thing. This is, you know, going to be the latest sort of, probably. I don't know if it will turn into as much of an ongoing saga as the Cliftonville one has. Hopefully not, from Glenavon's point of view. But again, it's a scenario where a club doesn't want to be left behind when they see what's happening elsewhere. But as we have seen, sort of from the Cliftonville situation, everything has to be right. Otherwise, it can create a terribly toxic atmosphere, and things can go horribly wrong. Um, let's hope not. Obviously, Glenavon are probably in a position, you mentioned about how quickly it may or it may not be done. Glenavon's need for urgency is obviously greater than a lot of other clubs, that if they want to try and maybe turn this around. But I mean, even still, is all this going to be done in time? If it is completed, is it going to be completed in time for Michael O'Connor to sort of throw the kitchen sink at landing a few big
Well,
name
that's,
arrivals?
you know, it's only just through on the grapevine, but I have talked to people who are at that phase where they're like, can we get this done? Because what they're hearing, the investment would be, let's sort this out. Where there could be contracts and rolls of the dice, which would be quite surprising. It might be too late, might not happen. Maybe they have got the wrong end of the stick. But it could be a situation where Glenavon are almost, like, not at Man City levels, obviously, or even like an Irish League version of that. But remember when Man City were first taken over and they had a certain amount of time just to try and get the players in. That's what at least some fans from Glenavon are hoping this could be.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, I suppose, Peter, where the devil will be in the detail. Is it the sort of, you know, is it their plan to join the full time ranks? Is it just simply sort of an investor putting money in? And again, I always sort of have a chuckle to myself, Peter, when I see that word. There's, oh, we needed an investor. To me, my sort of definition of an investor would be someone who maybe puts some sort of capital in there in the hope or the expectation of getting something back out of it. Are you really going to do that with an Irish League club? To me, it's more, I think, benefactor is the word rather than investor. I think it has to be someone who's prepared to put their money where their mouth is, and not be scared to lose some money. I actually think, Peter, whether it be Ballymena or whether it be one of the full time clubs, this is a sort of notion that I've had at the back of my mind for a while, with all this talk about full time and the sustainability. I honestly think some of the full time or some of the part time clubs are missing a trick here. You know, they should really be sort of pitching themselves as the club for players who can't commit to full time, of which there are quite a number in the league, whether it be for work reasons or any other sort of personal reasons. You know, full time football isn't for everybody. Some clubs should be really sort of really making a pitch of it and saying, well, you can't do that. We're the club to come. We're the next best thing. We're the most successful. We're the best. We have the best playing squad outside of the full time teams. It's just the reason I say that is because at Ballymena, and at other clubs as well, you've got players who are probably, it's all their income is probably derived from football. They're probably getting paid a decent wage, but they're only training the 2 or 3 nights a week that their part-time club trains. This sort of, it's almost a bit of like a halfway house as such, where you've got players basically almost getting full-time wages, but they're playing for part-time clubs and they're training at a part-time level, and it's a bit of a strange one.
I think you say almost part-time wages or full-time wages. I think there's a lot of what could be considered full-time wages if you wanted to live off some of the wages, and not like a majority, but a significant amount of players could probably do that if they want to. And you see these players who have a career that they've worked hard to establish. They're also having success on the pitch. Maybe they're not at a phase in their life where I hope that they go, look, I'm not realistically going to be in a position where I can push on and really, really go full time. And they are earning a pretty penny if they're able to bring in a full-time career, and let's put a number on it. Let's say it's somewhere between 30 and 40k. They can then add in their Irish League money, which if you're getting somewhere between £500 and £700 a week, I'm not saying majority of our Irish League players are on that, but if you can, you can live live on that in your 20s, depending on your circumstance. So when you're hearing about part-time players earning four figures, or at least the rumor and innuendo and suggestion is that they're earning four figures or almost four figures, that's where we are within the Irish League, is that plenty of clubs are offering $750 plus for you to be a part-time footballer, and then that's putting up the market for everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, you're not doing too badly, Peter.
No,
If you're
you're
getting
no,
that
you're
sort
not.
of money as a quote unquote part-time footballer there. I can remember, Peter, going back a number of years. I can remember a player at Ballymena, and he had a good day job, and he was getting he would have said it himself, well paid at Ballymena, to the extent where he was able. I can't remember which was which, but he was basically sort of either he was able to live off his daytime job wage and basically sort of put his football money away in savings, or else it was vice versa, where But certainly, I've always had this sort of idea. I've personally, Peter, never sort of really seen this fascination of the whole full time thing in the Irish League. Maybe it's just an age thing on my part, but to me, the Irish League is a part time, semi professional league where players can make decent money for a couple of nights training on top of their day job. I mean, don't get me wrong. If I thought full time football was sustainable, I would back it to the hilt. But I think our game isn't really sort of built on those sort of foundations. Gate receipts and sponsorships don't cover the running costs, and there's no multi-million-pound TV deal underpinning the whole thing like you would have with the English Premier League. I think over here, in many cases, clubs are being funded by an individual or individuals, and if there's ever a breakdown in the relationship between that person and the club, then the results could be catastrophic for a club.
But that's where you hear clubs saying we couldn't possibly go full time, but it would be from many onlookers' view that there's actually some clubs that are offering not from 1 to, let's say, 22 when it comes to squad, but they're offering a significant amount of their squad could be on full time wage if they wanted to. But clearly, there's, as you said there, the attraction is they can keep the career and earn as much as possible within Irish League football, which is totally their right, whilst also looking success. And it feels like for some clubs, actually, the buyer isn't paying full time wages. The buyer is, the market for full time wages is so high that you can't convince these players to go full time. And then you go, what is the benefit of full time football if I know some of them are clearly the top four are all full time. Like you can see the benefit and squad makeup, but I can't see clubs wanting to go full time because they're happy to take the offcuts in a way.
Yeah, yeah. I would never, Peter. I would never begrudge any player or any individual
Absolutely.
making as much money from whatever occupation they're in as possible. Ultimately, I don't blame players one bit because it's the club who are in total control of how much they pay them. You're not going to hear a case where a club says to a player, "You're going to £500 a week," and the player says, "You know what? That actually sounds a bit much. £350 would be enough. That's not going to happen." It's the same argument when a player transfers to another club and you hear somebody say, "That guy's not worth that transfer fee." Well, maybe in that person's opinion, yes, but that may be what you think or that person thinks. But if the club that's writing the check says a player is worth, say, £100,000 in Irish League terms or £50 million in English terms, well, then that's what they're worth. That's what the value is. Whoever's writing the check to say that there. He who pays the piper calls the tune and all that. I think, Peter, as well, another recent example of how the whole thing has spiraled, in my view, is, you're talking maybe only 4 or 5 years ago where, that massive influx of UEFA money came in for clubs competing in Europe. And the big thing for Irish League clubs was, oh, we have to get that European money. And at that stage, that 200,000 or 250,000 or whatever it was, that would have gone a long way towards covering a club's overheads for the season. Fast forward 4 or 5 years, and that sort of money now wouldn't even touch the sides, would it? Irish League clubs now have to be looking at getting through a couple or three rounds if they're to make any sort of meaningful money, or else do a Larn and reach the holy grail of the group stages. I think, of course, it's one of the great myths. People always hear about, the 200,000 for Europe. That clubs pocket all that figure. That's not the case, because once you take the expensive charter flights and the other outlay like that, it fairly eats into what you've earned. And of course, the more clubs who go down the full time route in the Irish League, for a lot of them, well, what's our expectation now? Well, our expectation will be to qualify for Europe. Well, there's still only going to be 4 European places, aren't there? If there's 6 or 7 clubs, isn't going to go into 4 places, so someone's going to miss out, and that's where the problems might start. I think we're maybe already seeing the outworkings of that scenario with Crusaders, who've gone from being pretty much annual European competitors, and then when that source of income stopped, it's had an inevitable knock-on effect on finances, which in turn impacts upon the calibre of players that you can afford. And now we have Crusaders embroiled in a relegation battle and losing key players, as we've already talked about, like O'Rourke and Clark.
But if we're in a situation where behind the scenes you're hearing that there is multiple clubs within the Irish League where their wage budget is 7 figures, where are we? I'm not their accountants, but as fans, you're wondering where is this going?
Yeah, sometimes I think fans, they're either oblivious to it, or they just simply don't want to sort of countenance what's actually happening. It's the sort of thing I can remember, Peter, sort of last season when Ballymena had been given a bit of a financial boost and they were signing some decent names, and obviously the Ben Kennedys and whatnot. And I can remember saying to a Ballymena official one day, I can remember, these guys can't be coming cheap. And he's sort of got a wee bit defensive. And
Every fan.
You don't know much. Ballymena are paying them. And I went, of course I don't. And I said, and if the club does its business correctly, I won't know, because it shouldn't be made public. But I said the one thing about it I will say is that the sort of names we're talking about, they're not coming here for £200 a week and a nice view of Slemish. So it's sort of don't insult people's intelligence either, by the same token.
Absolutely, you're hearing the players with their goal bonus in the hundreds. So if it can be covered, and I think Jared Lawler's been very open with this when he's done panels. He's talked about how he doesn't see it that there are people investing, as the way you put it, they are benefactoring the club. They are not going to make it back at Irish League level, but ultimately at this stage, I'm not sitting there with the books. I'm not sitting there thinking about income. I don't know how much is being made from shirt sales and coffees and teas and bars. And, it does all add up to one big pie. But we've often talked about in this podcast how our cousins in the Republic of Ireland kind of had work their way through all of this in the 20-year transition that they've had to what the League of Ireland is now. And look, Irish League has also had its financial troubles, but it's when it's all going well, players are coming in, and we're hearing of record salaries for excellent players, brilliant. But it all kind of feels not as exciting if a bill comes due and they're not in a position to cover it. But let's not be doom and gloom about something that we don't know is there. It's just, I think every fan is pondering this. Let's talk about the main reason I wanted to talk to you here, and just give us a bit of a insight from on the stands. Obviously, you covered doing some reporter stuff as well on Ballymena. It has seen a big change since Jim Irvin moved on, and what I think had been expected for weeks, with Oran Kearney coming in. He signed his players. He's tried to reset his team. And so far, and as we talked at the top of this podcast, he hasn't had a huge amount of games to change things up. Outside of a nice little result on Boxing Day, it really hasn't gotten off the ground yet, this Oran Kearney era. Is the honeymoon period already over?
It's difficult to even say, Peter, for the honeymoon period, because I think it's been such an unusual period. I think Oran's had almost as many games postponed as he has actually managed so far. So it's just been a bit of a wacky start to his reign. Like, I think the one thing about it is, whenever sort of Ballymena made the decision to part company with Jim Irvin, I think sort of immediately sort of Oran was installed as the fan favourite, as and I've had people say to me, oh, is it not a problem with him being a former Coleraine manager? It's not, because I think, and this is sort of, you're kind of, again, I'm maybe showing my age here, it was Oran had a really good spell at Ballymena, where he basically established himself to, and that's where he earned his move ultimately to Linfield, where he had a very successful playing career. The thing with Oran, even when he was manager of Coleraine, he always had that sort of credit in the bank. It was, he never got a terribly hard time from Ballymena fans when he was managing Coleraine. So there was always that sort of respect there. And I think as well, what people will always say about Oran as a person, you'll never see Oran sort of grandstanding and coming out with sort of outlandish statements in the media. He's very measured, he's very articulate, and he's the sort of person who I think sort of gains the respect of fans right throughout the league. Again, obviously, it's a terrific track record in management, but it's it's just it did make me laugh sort of at the time. It was like, right, okay, we've got Oran, that's us now, okay, good stuff. And it's sort of like as if it was just like, right, well, we've got Oran now, and that's, everything will just tick on nicely. It's whether, as I say, fans were just sort of oblivious to the amount of work that actually needed to be done, or whether they just didn't want to sort of think about that. I think Oran realizes himself he has a really big job in his hands. I mean, let's go back, Peter. Let's take the actual timing of his appointment as an example. I can't think of too many managerial appointments in the Irish League that have been made sort of in the middle of December. Quite often you see clubs maybe starting to get a bit twitchy around October, November time. They're maybe thinking about whether they need to change manager, because they're thinking, well, hold on, this manager, this would-be new manager is going to need a bit of time to run his eye over the current squad to see what they can offer. Oran's case, coming in sort of mid-December, he's coming in 2 or 3 weeks before a transfer window opens, and he's having to maybe make snap judgments on players' futures off the back of a few training sessions and a couple of matches in late December. That in itself, Peter, is a fairly tough gig, but what has made the situation worse is that Oran hasn't even been able to sort of form these judgments on a lot of players because of the number of players on the treatment table. Now, I'm the first person, Peter, to cringe when managers talk about injuries because it's
Don't get me
it's
started.
page one of the big book of managerial excuses, isn't it? But every club suffers them at some point throughout the season. But I think it's the nature of the injuries that's been really damaging to Ballymena. We're not sort of talking twinges and niggles here. I'll give you a few examples. Donald Rocks has been out since August after a knee operation. I think he's making good progress, but still a long way off being match fit. Ben Kennedy's awaiting a hip
I
operation.
forgot he was still there.
Who's that?
Ben Kennedy.
Ben Kennedy. Yeah, it's funny. Just he's been out for a while, and it's funny how you just sort of people kind of do sort of slip under the radar. But I mean, again, he's unlikely to play again this season. Patrick McElhaney recovering from a broken wrist just after Owen took over, and Patrick's role has been helping out from a coaching perspective, whereas I'm sure Owen would much rather see him out there on the pitch. Calvin McCurry was a regular starter up front under Jim Irvin. He's been out since November. Kim Nelson hasn't played since November. Ryan McNichol was just starting to establish himself and get a few goals when he dislocated his shoulder at the Oval in October. I think I actually spotted it today there. I think Ryan's gone out on loan to Limavady for the second half of the season. So hopefully again that'll get him back up and running. Dara O'Connor had issues around his fitness, which basically delayed the start of his season by about maybe a month or a couple of months, although he's getting a run of games now. Like these are the sort of things that Oren inherited, and that I suppose the only real difference between earlier in the season and now is that Jim literally didn't have the services of these guys at all, of a lot of these players, whereas Oren might well have some of them coming back in the coming weeks. But again, nowhere near match fit. And, Oren's going to have to select squads on the basis of, well, this guy can only come on as a sub, or this guy can start, but I'll only get an hour out of him. So, like, you're already picking squads for games, and maybe half your substitutions are almost sort of made for you, rather, before you even factor in somebody maybe getting injured in that game or having to change something tactically. You throw in something as well, Peter, like the Sean O'Neill situation. You're having to bring in a new goalkeeper in mid-season. It takes time to build up that relationship between a goalkeeper and his defenders. If you've been used as a defender, the ball's crossed into the penalty area, and you're as a defender, you're thinking that's okay. Our goalkeeper will come for that and just clean everybody out here. That might have been the old keeper might have done that, whereas the new keeper, he might be rooted to his goal line. It creates an extra layer of uncertainty at a crucial stage of the season.
I would also like to add in Andy Scott, who I think shined at times last season. Carson, did he play a game this year? Even though he's
Carson didn't play. Carson didn't play this year before his move to Portadown. He picked up a sort of a nasty looking injury in a pre-season game, which kept him out for a while. So yeah, there were a few other players there who weren't available for various reasons.
You talk about the timing there when it came to Owen Kearney coming in. Do you feel it was late or early?
It's as I say, it's more common to see that sort of decision if you're maybe sort of starting to have doubts over your manager. It would quite often happen before that stage. But can you? I certainly can't think of too many times where a manager's come in maybe just before Christmas and had to sort of immediately navigate a transfer window.
It felt as though at the time, because there had been the odd movement here or there when it came to managers, particularly the Glenavon thing changing up, a few other
Yeah.
teams, that pretty much Oran was on the market, and it felt like a good connection, forgetting the fact that you already had Jim Irvin there. So maybe it was strike while the iron's hot, change things up here. Looking back, and maybe thinking about it at the time, surprised that they went, Jim, here's 3 years full time. Jim Irvin, this was at the end of last season.
Yeah, I mean, Jim had come in and he had a really really tough baptism. This was at a time the David Jeffrey era had come to an end, and as happens, Peter, this I've seen this sort of throughout a lifetime of watching Ballymena and covering Ballymena's fortunes. They tend to go through sort of boom and bust periods. You know, maybe there may be a time where obviously Norman McBurney, who now Norman's contribution to the club has been incredible over a number of years. They've named the stand at the showgrounds in his honour now. That ceremony actually took place last week.
Big lettering. We haven't seen enough of it.
Yeah, big letters. You can actually see it from the top of Warden Street there. It's sort of almost like the Ballymena equivalent of the Hollywood sign there. No, it's obviously, Norman has contributed enormously over the years, as now has his son Philip is a major shareholder in the club as well. But there have been times as well where things have been a bit tight, and budgets have been cut, and again that impacts upon the players. And I always sort of felt sorry for the managers who have been in at those times. Jim came in at one of those times. Finances weren't great, sort of towards the end of the time when David Jeffrey left. Jim came in, a real sort of threadbare squad, unable to compete for really good players. Ballymena were probably saved in Jim's first season just by the fact that Newry had such a poor season and were relegated, and that was the start of a terrible downward spiral for Newry, which has seen them end up now in the third tier. Probably Jim's big achievement actually at Ballymena probably came in that first season in keeping Ballymena in the top flight. Scary stuff that there. Playoff, I think I've talked about it before. Still convinced to this day, if Oisin Devlin hadn't been sent off for Institute with 12 minutes left, I think Ballymena would have been heading for Dergview the next season. That's as close as anybody really can come to going down. And I think that probably sharpened a few minds off the pitch that summer, because Ballymena came back, and I think the first one really, because there were a few sort of fairly low key signings. I'm not talking about the summer just past. I'm talking about what would have been Jim's second season in charge, and then all of a sudden the next thing was Josh Carson. This came at the time when Coleraine were going into the full time transition, and then this was quickly followed by Stephen O'Donnell and Aaron Jarvis, this caliber of player. You think this is good, and then all of a sudden, boom, Ben Kennedy from out of absolutely nowhere. What's going on here? And then as things went on, Patrick McElhaney, that caliber of player. It was fairly incredible, the turnaround, and it quickly became obvious that Ballymena had got a bit of significant financial backing again to try and pull themselves out of that sort of situation that they had been in. Possibly then with that, when the money goes in, probably the expectation rises with it. And just, the start of this, if we fast forward, Peter, to the start of this season, Ballymena won their opening 3 league games, won them, I thought, fairly comfortably against Glenavon, Portadown and Bangor. And you're sort of thinking, okay, well, that's 3 teams who you were maybe expecting to be in the lower half of the table there. Little did we know with Bangor just what an impact they would make. But again, sort of from there, things just sort of gradually started to go downhill. And you were sort of approaching that busy Christmas period, and you're thinking, wonder what way this is going to go. But even still, I think sort of the timing of Jim's departure, I think it came as a shock to a lot of people, including myself. I spoke to him. His last game was a defeat at Glenavon. I spoke to him after the game, and he was already sort of making plans for the following week's game, and all of a sudden, then by the following day, by lunchtime, the announcement had been made that they had parted company with him. So again, say the timing of that was just, I remember thinking, blimey, whoever comes in here is going to have to hit the ground running, because they only have a few weeks until they have to start making decisions about who they're going to bring in and who they're going to get rid of.
It's like, you look at that, you talk about those 3 wins to start the season. That win at home against Linfield, you could add that into the mix. There's 12 points in 4 games. In the other 20 games that you've played, you've only got 13 points.
Yeah, I mean the warning signs were there. I think up
That's
until
up to now, obviously.
yeah, I think up until after that sort of early period, and obviously getting points on the board is early on is very important. But I think whenever Ballymena beat Korean on Boxing Day under for Oran's first win, I think that was the first time in something like 14 or 15 games they had kept a clean sheet in the league. So not keeping clean sheets at one end, really struggling to score goals at the other. I mean, I think Peter, right up to now, I think Success Edigan is Ballymena's top goal scorer this season with and I think it's 5 goals in all cup, in all competitions, which includes some cup games as well. So I mean, like your top scorer, you're into late January, and your top scorer is sitting with 5 goals. It's put that into the context of Pat Hoban scored more than that in an hour.
Well, you're strangely not as bad as people might suspect. Glenavon are bottom of the charts here, 19 goals in the league all year. Cruise 31, Ballymena 28, which is the second lowest. But Carrick have only scored 33, Portadown 30, Bangor 30, Cliftonville 31, but they've played like 3 games less. Dungannon Swifts on 32. So it has felt like a real weak point, but in turn, statistically, it hasn't been that bad. The goals against is kind of not awful compared to Cruise 50, Glenavon 51, Ballymena on 37. Like it's only
Yeah,
it's it's
yeah. I
it's
mean,
it's
the
still
whole thing,
less than
Peter.
Carrick, Portadown, Bangor, and Swifts.
Yeah, the whole thing about it, I mean, nobody can sort of paint the picture that it's been a disaster of a season. It hasn't. You couldn't call it that. It just kind of sort of hasn't kicked on. If you understand what I mean, there was a fairly good platform with those 9 points out of nine early on. It's just probably a lot of games. Ballymena were even struggling to create chances and that type of thing as well. It's not as if Ballymena haven't been getting hammered. They're still reasonably hard to score against, but they generally end up conceding, at least one goal and for those 14 games in a row. And when you're doing that and you're not scoring many at the other end, you're not going to win too many games. You're not giving yourself the best chance to win too many games.
So you have change of manager. You bring in new players as well, including like Dean Ebe, Aga Rakowski, McElhenney's in there. You've got a new goalkeeper. It hasn't gone brilliantly, sterlingly well for Kearney, and you're now in a position where the bottom of the table looks like Glenavon, out of sorts, 4 losses on the bounce, 25 games played, 12 points. Cruise, 25 games played, 24 points. And then there is Ballymena, just 1 point above the Cruise. They've got a game in hand. They've now been overtaken by Carrick, who have 1 point more than them, same games played. Portadown have got 3 points more than you with the same amount of games played. That was going to be a really interesting fixture coming up. And then it's 6 points between you and Bangor with you having a game in hand on them. So you're not that far away from looking better. But I think all those
Mm-hmm.
teams that I mentioned, you might even argue Cliftonville, if they really start to fall off, which I kind of think they might, you're all in the mix for 11th here. So you
Yeah.
bring in these signings, they come in to shore things up, of course. But is the pressure on now to just avoid 11th and try and sneak into 7th, or is there a push on here? Look, focus it on at least getting within a dice roll because you've got the League Cup as well, but Europe's still in play.
Yeah, I think probably all those teams that you mentioned there, anybody from seventh to 11th, they could all probably they could all say we could have a go at seventh. Equally, they're probably all going, we have to make sure we avoid 11th. All it takes is, usually, Peter, in quite a lot of leagues, sometimes it happens in the Irish League as well, some team that you think is absolutely safe, just all of a sudden gets sucked down in the last couple of months, and all of a sudden it becomes a bit uncomfortable. I think Ballymena just probably have to make sure that that's not them. But again, it's, I can remember, obviously, Carrick have hit a bit of form in the last couple of weeks. Um, two excellent results in the league, and obviously winning the Shield in between. I think even before Christmas, I think I remember Crusaders had some sort of wee run of like 3 games unbeaten where they picked up 5 points or 7 points or something like that. I think it's just if you can get yourself onto some sort of wee mini run where you can maybe stitch together 3 or 4 games unbeaten and just try and pull yourself up. But the thing about it is, you're sort of powerless to stop what's going on elsewhere. If you come in, you've maybe got a draw from a hard earned point, and then all of a sudden you hear the other results, and the team below you has won and has maybe drawn level with you or leapfrogged you in the table. It's that sort of thing. If you're not winning games, you sort of put yourself at risk of losing ground to a team around you who maybe does win a game, and that one win is maybe enough for them to overtake you.
And this is probably people within the club. I'll ask you then more direct. Would you shake my hand for ninth right now?
Oh, I would think so. I think, as I said earlier, I think Oran's focus is very much on the short term now. I think it's between now and the end of the season. I think there's has to maybe just stabilise things a wee bit and then get a good appraisal of
What
the
you got?
squad in the summer, and probably a fairly significant overhaul of the playing staff, I would imagine. But that's not the type of thing that happens in January. You can't sort of you just randomly chop and change an entire team either, can you? Interesting to see how some of those guys will do that. Funny you mentioned Igor Rakowski there. I felt so sorry for him. He scored twice against Cliftonville that night, and it's the sort of thing in years to come people will say, do you remember that night that young fella scored 2 goals in his debut for Ballymena? And straight away the reply would come, "Oh yeah, the Sean O'Neill game."
Well,
Rutkowski scores 2 goals, and it was almost sort of ignored in many senses. So hopefully there'll be a few more goals in him. That was the sort of signing. I know there's been some suggestion in some quarters there's maybe a bit of a sort of a grey area as to whether those players, Rutkowski and Dean Ebba, whether maybe they had already been signed by Jim Irvin in anticipation of the January window. And then obviously by the time January came, unfortunately, Jim wasn't there. Or possibly, they could well be Oran signings. No, nobody really knows. There's that sort of bit of a grey area there, irrespective of who signed them. They are Ballymena players now, and it'll be up to Oran to get a tune out of them.
are you expecting any additions between now and when the window shuts?
It's difficult to say because Oran's the sort of manager. He'll keep his cards quite close to his chest. There, he'll obviously know himself if there's maybe a specific area or a specific position that he's targeting. I think if the maybe sort of making it slightly distinct from times gone by. I think if he maybe identifies a player and there's a deal to be done there, I think there would be no issue with Ballymena having the financial backing to do a deal if he thinks that the right deal is there. Whereas in the past it might be, well, we would love that player, but we can't afford him. I think if the right player comes up, I think there'll be no issue in sort of striking a deal, but that'll be obviously up to Orna again. Uh, because of the number of players, Peter, who are already sort of out injured, it's a fairly, in my opinion, it's a fairly top-heavy squad with players, and Oran sort of historically at Coleraine liked to work off a fairly compact number of players in his first team squad. So I think he was saying the other day, there's probably an expectation that a few players might go out the way. I think that Ryan McNichol on loan to Limavady there is maybe the first of those. Whether or not there'll be many more coming in, I'm not entirely sure.
Well, we'll see if some of the big names which have been rumoured, Yad O'Rourke, could McKee see out the final few months of his contract, or Linfield, or could he become a Ballymena player in January, or maybe we'll have to wait to the summer. But there was no Ballymena game to talk of. Ditto for Portadown. one club who's getting a bit excited, yeah, this season is starting to look more and more like a write-off, is Glenavon. Could we see news this week around this potential takeover and financial injections? We'll have to see, but um, they didn't win against Coleraine, and it's another game where Coleraine win out. They don't look particularly thrilling for this full-time team with all their dough, with all their money, with all their investment. And it's a man who, to be honest, if you were talking to me in maybe mid-December saying who do you expect to not be playing for Coleraine, it probably would have been McGonigal. But I feel like he keeps popping up to finish the game off.
Yeah, that has been a bit of a theme, hasn't it, this season, Peter? He maybe doesn't necessarily start all that terribly many games, but by the time when he comes on and maybe up against a tiring defence, he's quite often the guy who it's not even necessarily, I think, Jimmy McGonigal's goals that it hasn't been maybe like a late winning goal. Jimmy McGonigal, for me, seems to be the guy who sets the seal on the victory with the game clinching goal. Obviously, a very good player. Again, a player who maybe some people thought his future may lie elsewhere, but I can't imagine Rory Higgins would be in too big a hurry to get rid of another really good attacking option. Again, what you said there is absolutely correct. It's three more points on the board, but it wasn't earth shattering stuff really from Korean, was it? It's keeping the points tally ticking over.
Four losses on the bounce. They have had additions, but they just haven't had a huge amount of time to take grip of this side. At least they got through in the Irish Cup. It's a hope, a wing, and a prayer at the minute for Glenavon, but in turn, they do need to pick up points soon. 13 games, they're probably counting every single one.
Yeah, I mean, the Glenavon situation is a slightly odd one, Peter, because if you ask most people, has Michael O'Connor done a good job since he went in there? Most people, and myself included, would probably say, well, yes, he has. He's managed to come up with four home wins from a side which hadn't earned a point before he took over. Yet the harsh reality, Peter, is that they were 10 points adrift when he took over, and yet now they're 12 points behind the team in
Yeah, you
11.
see, it's
It's
and
while Glenavon have been making some progress, albeit very slow, other teams above them in the bottom half of the table have been continuing to pick up points at a more regular rate than Glenavon have. You have to feel sorry, really, for Michael O'Connor because Glenavon's situation has obviously impacted the way in which he has gone about his transfer business in January. You can't be offering 18-month or 2.5 year permanent deals to players on good money when you know there's a strong possibility you might be in the championship next season. I wouldn't write them off just yet. But I mean, as the weeks go past, the situation looks increasingly more bleak. So that has restricted Glenavon basically to the loan market in the hope of players who are desperate just to get playing again will put together some sort of miraculous run, and if they can't, well, they'll go back to their parent clubs at the end of the season, and Glenavon aren't left with any sort of contract obligations that they can't meet without Premiership football. I mean, I said, Peter, I think that the last time I was on your podcast, I think Michael O'Connor had just been appointed fairly recently. You know, I said at the time he had nothing to lose by giving the Glenavon job a crack. He had no managerial reputation to damage. He could only enhance his reputation. And from speaking to Glenavon supporters and reading various comments, he seems to have got the backing of Glenavon supporters. In what has been very, very testing circumstances.
I'll say this about Glenavon. From at least a 1 to 11 point of view, I don't look at them as the worst team in the league right now. They are when it comes to the table and form, but I think if we started right here, right now, they wouldn't be the worst team the way things are set out.
Yeah, I mean, you look at even take that Korean game on Friday night as an example. I thought sort of they gave away, by all accounts, and I remember Rory Higgins being interviewed afterwards and saying, Glenavon gave Korean problems, not in the sense that they were bombarding them with attacks, but just they gave Korean a bit of a headache and how do we break these guys down? But I thought, Peter, the two goals, there seems to be a sort of a trend every week if you look at the goals Glenavon concede, you're thinking, somebody could have done better in there, whether it be the goalkeeper or some of the central defenders or somebody hasn't tracked a runner from midfield. I think that the goals that they've given away are too soft, and again a bit sort of like a bit like Ballymena at the other end. They don't score enough goals to give themselves a good chance of winning a lot of games. Obviously, if they can keep Peter Campbell fit, um, Campbell, McGovern, there's sort of bright lights in an attacking sense there, but it's just difficult to see where Glenavon are going to sort of stitch together that run that I was talking about there. If they could go 4 or 5 games unbeaten, but it's unlikely.
Yeah, they would almost like the split now
Yeah,
because they could be quite tasty in that, but also it could be too little too late
yeah.
coming on.
Well,
So
that's their only hope, Peter, isn't it? They have to sort of stay afloat until the split, because obviously we know from experience of seeing split games, not even obviously they make a big difference in the top half of the table and teams challenging for the title and whatnot. But I always sort of think in my mind it's even more marked in the bottom half of the table, where if you're coming up against a team who's a couple of places and 2 or 3 points ahead of you, you beat that team, and all of a sudden that changes everything. You've picked up the points, they haven't picked up the points. There's a swing in goal difference. All of a sudden, those sort of head-to-head matchups, make a really big difference.
I'm sure they're thinking, why haven't you talked about us just yet? Look, Carrick Rangers fans, you got a whole big hankering last week, but an amazing 7, 8, whatever, however many days you want to call it. They thump Cliftonville at home in the league. They then go to Seaview, get caught quite early on, then chase the game. They finally get the goal in the second half, and it goes to the penalties, which they showed their nerve. I'm sure writers would like to say they showed their steel with the last penalty there. And then they go back home and they take on a Dungannon Swift side who had won 4 of the last 5, and they thumped them. I'm not saying everybody fear Carrick Rangers, but everybody's starting to feel healthy. Not everybody, but key players are healthy. They've added a few extra additions, and they've got confidence. And they look more like the team that I got quite bullish about in, let's say, October time than they were in December. I flip-flop because I'm pretty sure a couple of weeks ago I said injuries are going to sink this team, and now they've scored 10 goals in 3 games.
Yeah, it's a very, very good turnaround from Carrick, because after they were another team like Ballymena who sort of started the season with a bit of style, got a lot of points on the board, and then sort of September, October, November, and December weren't an awful lot to write home about, and then they sort of seemed to have rekindled the spark in January. That was a terrific win at Solitude, and then obviously backing that up with winning the Shield. And it's funny, I was really pleased for Carrick winning the Shield, because I can remember the feeling whenever Ballymena won the County Antrim Shield, and I should know which year that is, and it's completely eluded me now, but whatever it was, 2014 or however many years ago it
And
was.
people say the Shield isn't a big trophy.
It's I can vividly remember how it felt, and for fans, because there was an entire generation of fans, Peter. I'm just about old enough there to remember Ballymena winning the Irish Cup in 1989. I was thinking about 11 or 12 at that stage. Made the mistake. It was my first season that of watching Ballymena, and I made the mistake of thinking this would be great every year. It was a long wait until the next trophy was hoisted into the air. But I can remember exactly how that felt for a club who hadn't won a major trophy in a long, long time, and I'm sure Carrick would really have enjoyed the celebrations of that. The big distinction between Ballymena winning it and Carrick, what happened then is, whereas Carrick went out and absolutely destroyed Dungannon on the Saturday, I can vividly remember, Peter, all those years ago. Ballymena's first game after winning the Shield was away at Donegal Celtic, and they lost 1-0. And it would rank in probably the top 5 worst Ballymena performances I have ever witnessed. It was horrendous, just a total Shield hangover. And funny, that actually came into my head on the Saturday morning. I was thinking, wonder how Carrick will get on with this today. There's your answer. I'm actually really interested to get your take on it, Peter, because I know you were there covering the game. I mean, to me, I was looking at that. It was a result which very few would have expected, and it just looked a very undungannon like performance, and even sort of some of the goals that they conceded, they would seem to get opened up very easily. What was your view on it?
Let's be clear here. Dungannon were rubbish. They were really bad. Defensively, they were completely all over the place. Glennie was a loss through suspension, so they put Danny Wallace at left back. You can see in the highlights, first 3 goals in that first half, all in some shape or form come down
Yeah,
that right hand side of defence. The other side of defence, wing back wise, didn't wasn't particularly great game for Miles Smith either. Midfield looked kind of uneven. There was no Alves from the start. You saw Shea Gordon playing high up, in this kind of weird diamond that sometimes Dungannon move about. It's more flexible than a diamond, but it pretty much had Junior, who had a bad game. You then had actually Andy Mitchell doing out wide to the left, oftentimes doing good things. But outside of that, between the bubbly pitch, between the massive wind, they couldn't get it down. And actually, when you talk about game state and flow, it was a nice little maneuver to get the first goal. Dungannon then looked angry and was like, right, let's sort this out. And that rush to get the goal back hurt them again in that it was a defensive mistake. Carrick just seemed really assured and nipped in neatly. 2-0, disaster after 15 minutes. And then the third one came from bad defending, and that was it over. And there was no change at halftime from Rodney McAree. Just thought, let's work with what I've got. But I've always thought, actually, defensively, Dungannon, that's their weak point. They're quite brittle there. And you saw it, again, good individual players, Marin and Maguire, but it just was not a good day at all. And it's hard to not feel as though, I think, we saw it. Carrick got thumped at their own home ground a couple of weeks ago, and now they look really confident and secure at the back, and everyone's looking a bit healthier than they used to with Callagher back, Billy Joe Burns coming in. That's a decent three in BJ Burns on the right hand side of the three, Callagher in the middle doing things, McCulloch so assured on the left hand side. You have speedy wing backs. Even BJ Burns can step over the halfway line and deliver big crosses to Lecky. I wonder, will the Lecky transfer working? Will that push people to take more risks? In that there's two ways the Lecky thing, and you've seen both sides of it this year. You see him injured and out, and that's tough because he's older and he's had a big whole season out last year. And then you see completely game influencing player that no other team in the bottom six have. He scored a hat-trick there on Saturday. Heatley looks bright as well. Gibson can be on and off. Fear Carrick. And I wonder, as the light slightly left Dungannon, they're signing a lot of players. It just doesn't seem as secure as it was a couple of weeks ago. I do say, hey, look, they've won 4 out of the last 5, but you include their 1-0 wins against Glenavon and against Bangor. At least Bangor was home on Boxing Day. Losing to Cruz. I'm not saying it's complete falling apart of Dungannon, but they don't fear me as much as I think they had been.
yeah, I
But
think.
you've seen Rodney fix this. They couldn't buy a win at the start of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it was strange. I was really taken aback by that result on Saturday because I had watched the previous Saturday. I'd watched Dungannon beat Ballymena, and I thought Dungannon beat Ballymena very handily. But Ballymena maybe didn't offer an awful lot. I think Dungannon should have won that. Um, but by a bigger margin. But I really didn't see that one coming. I mean, the Carrick thing you mentioned there, Burns, Callagher, McCulloch, what some experience, Peter, in that back line, isn't there? I mean, this is one thing I noticed, and it's sort of, I don't have the actual sort of facts and figures here. It's more of a sort of an anecdotal thing that I've noted. Whenever I'm updating my stats each week, Peter, I'm taking note of substitutions and things like that. In the first half of the season, whereas nearly every other manager uses their 5 allotted substitutions in a game, quite often when it came to do Carrick, Stephen Baxter would maybe use 1 or 2. There were actually, Peter, quite a number of occasions in the first half of the season where he finished the game with the same 11 which started it. Now, whether that was maybe he possibly felt, because when you looked at the subs bench in the first half of the season, it was comprised quite often of a lot of young, inexperienced players. Whether he felt maybe they maybe didn't have the nous to make an impactful change in the game, I don't know. But you mentioned there they've brought in players. I'm not sort of saying that even it's not sort of world beating material, but they're bringing in players that players who've been around this, like Mikey Place, Joe Moore. It just seems now they maybe
Mikey
have.
Place feels like a Stephen Baxter player, actually.
Yeah,
You've seen him with Ballymena.
yeah,
He can be frustrating in the sense that he looks like a really good physical player, but doesn't maybe have the absolute running to be a central midfielder in that pressured role.
yeah.
Isn't really a winger either. But he's this kind of right side of a five in defence. Has suited him so far.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Mikey Place is a terrific athlete, getting up and down the pitch. There, great engine. Always remember that at Ballymena. Maybe sort of lacked a wee bit of end product at times, but no, certainly in Carrick's possession, a good sign and an experienced player now, a player who knows the league. You mentioned Lecky earlier on. I can always think back fondly to Adam Lecky's spell at Ballymena. Under David Jeffrey, he was, that was I think that was the season when Ballymena went sort of quite close to winning the league. Um, just a terrific player. You can see straight away why he would fit into a Stephen Baxter team. I'm not sort of drawing a direct comparison with Jordan Owens, because they're completely different players. In that Jordan Owens was such a powerhouse at Crusaders, winning headers and winning knockdowns. Lecky isn't necessarily that type of player, but what he does so well, he holds the ball up so well, and he brings players into play around him. The likes of Heatley and Danny Gibson can play off a Lecky, and obviously when he was out injured, they were maybe missing that sort of focal point up front.
Totally. Could do with a few more attacking reinforcements, but they still have a bit more time in the transfer window, and maybe that whip round with their American funders has worked. I mean, you have Michael Smith on there on the radio talking about how the guts of $1 million they've got between 2,000 members. You do the maths in pounds. That's an average about $350 per person.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So they're getting it some way somehow.
Uh-huh.
Whether you're, Taylor or whatever, or Uncle Rico, you're invested in your jurors, and long may it continue. It's a different. It's a different way to try and bring in new fans and raise a bit of money. We'll see what the long term impact of it is, but let's not take it away. Great week for Carrick. Let's see if they can continue things going on. One of the teams around them is the Crews. Linfield win 1-0 at home. Didn't seem that thrilling. I was having a great time at Carrick in my first ever commentary game down there, so I had a good time. It felt as though my commentary counterpart in Michael Hammond didn't have such a thrilling afternoon.
Yeah, probably just a case really of job done for Linfield. Probably not an awful lot more that David Healy would take out of it than that. Just again, keep the wins coming, keep the clean sheets coming. Again, probably not a sparkling performance, but this probably isn't a sparkling Linfield team, really, if we're being honest. But they have obviously a big, probably the title is obviously, I think, beyond them at this. They can't see Larne slipping up, or can't see Linfield putting together that sort of ridiculous winning streak that might overhaul them. But obviously, vitally important that they secure European football.
And then final game of the weekend is to talk about there. So this guy Andy Ryan, it feels like he might be a good player for Lord. Actually, I feel like he's got a bit of credentials. 2 goals against Bangor. Seems good, this guy.
Think there's a player in there, isn't there? No, it's funny. I was interviewing Gary after the game, and I made the point to Gary Haverin that while all the other Irish League managers are scrambling around trying to bolster their squad, trying to sign somebody that'll add to their squad, Gary's sort of big January arrival in inverted commas is arguably the best striker in the league back from a long-term injury. I mean, talk about something just falling into your lap there. And the thing about him is he's back. I can remember I covered the game a few weeks ago, the Coleraine game, where he came on as a sub, and I think sort of within about 10 minutes he had scored twice and sort of basically turned that game in Larne's favour. Friday night was his first start. Um, he looked really sharp, although to be fair, the two crosses as well, Aaron Donnelly for the first goal, Tomas Cosgrove for the second goal, the quality of the ball that was delivered on both those occasions. I'm sure Andy Ryan's eyes were just lighting up in the middle whenever that happened. Again, Andy Ryan hit the post in first half injury time, denied him a first half hat trick. I think if Larne had scored a third goal there, that could have finished any sort of number you wanted. As it was, Bangor got back into it a wee bit after the break. They scored a really nicely worked goal, and that was 7 minutes into the second half, and you're thinking all of a sudden Larne have made this unnecessarily difficult for themselves. But I think Bangor having just got the lift of scoring that goal within about sort of 5 minutes, then Lewis Harrison was sent off, and that kind of sort of punctured Bangor, and really I think Larne missed a ridiculous number of chances to add to their tally. So it's one of those, Peter, where you're looking at it and going, 2-1, that must have been quite close. Bangor must have run them close. They didn't really.
We look ahead now to this weekend, all on Saturday. Let's see whatever the current storm's called, if it blows them away. We do have two games in the League Cup, which we haven't totally covered here. Blues against Ballymena, now both on Wednesday night, and then Glens against Coleraine. It's out of those other sides. From a Ballymena perspective, Linfield's probably the one that you'd want to take. Maybe not at Windsor Park because you haven't won there since the colour TV was invented. But, I mean, you might argue that you're fresh for it, or maybe, on game ready.
Yeah, it's that sort of fine line between freshness and, as you say, just not simply not being able to get through the gears at all. You're probably right. Out of the other three teams, Linfield was probably maybe the one that you would have taken. How it's not very often that you would say that there, but as you say, Ballymena's record at Windsor Park is dismal. It's the sort of thing, Peter, where and again, Ballymena go there on Saturday in the league as well. It's the sort of thing where when the fixture list would come out at the start of the season, if you were a Ballymena fan, you'd be leafing through it and going, oh, I see we're away at Linfield that day in the league there. I think I'll maybe paint the garden fence or something that day. It's just a wasted afternoon. The record up there is absolutely dreadful since I think it was 2004, and a young Dominic Melly scored the winning goal, and that has been it for Ballymena in terms of league wins at Windsor Park since then.
The extra bit of spice here is that the winner of the League Cup also gets a trophy and dough, and it's almost beating out the Irish Cup for the biggest solo day when it comes to cup and a bit of pageantry and all that type of stuff for a final. Glens Coleraine at the Oval, that could really go either way, couldn't it? That feels like a very even game, both in form and stature of teams.
Yeah, again, it's one of those games. How many changes maybe will either manager make? Declan Devine, Rory Higgins. How much emphasis will they put on the League Cup? Coleraine obviously still will feel they're gunning for the title. Glentoran probably that bit further back. I think out of the four teams that are left, all the managers will be thinking, as you've touched upon there, they're thinking if we can get in there and win this, we have at least guaranteed ourselves a European playoff final. Big cut, probably more so, those other teams will be fancying their chances, Peter. Obviously, Linfield, Glentoran, Coleraine will be fancying their chances of reaching Europe via their league position. Obviously, the big appeal there is for Ballymena, who won't be anywhere near that, and they're probably thinking here's a possible shot at Europe here, especially from Ballymena's perspective. Having Larne in the Irish Cup, that might, if current form comes into it, that might sort of bring an abrupt end to Ballymena's Irish Cup hopes. That's if they ever get the game played at any stage, of course. But no, a big thing. I think it was a really good initiative on Niffle's part to introduce that there, because it definitely adds something extra. It's an extra carrot, isn't it, for the clubs that are involved at this stage in a competition, which I have to say Niffle have done brilliantly. Whenever I was sort of growing up, the League Cup was a bit of a sort of a meh, it's a trophy. Of course, you want to win it, but there's not an awful lot to it. Can't say that now. I've been fortunate enough. I've covered the League Cup final on a few occasions, and as you say, it's probably right up there, rivaling the Irish Cup final in terms of pomp and splendour.
I loathe to mention sponsors, but do you remember the CIS era and there was a group stage?
Yes. Oh, yes.
What was that?
Oh,
Group stage at the start of the season.
oh
All
boy.
right. Anyway, we'll move on. I'd just leave that in the past, like the Irish League has. I'm gonna look ahead to Saturday. 5 games at 3 o'clock. Wow, and then 1.5, 5, just to be awkward. Portadown Carrick. Let's actually start there because we were talking about Carrick there. Portadown haven't played a game for ages, and they go up against Carrick, who's doing pretty well. I think Carrick could keep rocking and rolling here. I think it's going to be 2-0 Carrick.
Could be if we go on form. Form may well play a part. Portadown, as you say, they've had a lot of games called off recently as well. I think Portadown are another of those teams, Peter, this season who, I'll look at results and Portadown will maybe win a couple of league games in a row, and you'll sort of think to yourself, oh well, that's Portadown, sort of well out of the equation, and then they'll maybe lose a couple and other teams will catch up with them. And it seems that any time they sort of build up a bit of momentum to move a couple of places up the table, within a couple of weeks' time, they're sort of back down in that muddle, as you often talk about there. Again, whether Portadown will be able to sort of get back up to speed straight away after that enforced break last week. Big week. If we look even slightly further ahead, Peter, than Saturday, Carrick go to Portadown. It's a crucial game. Carrick play Bangor, I think, on the Tuesday night as well. So this might be sort of this period of 2 or 3 weeks might be the one where Stephen Baxter's maybe looking at it. If Carrick can continue the momentum, they're quite capable of going to Shamrock Park and getting a result. They're quite capable of getting a result against Bangor. This could be a pivotal few days in Carrick's season, as if the last week or so hasn't been pivotal enough. But I fancy Carrick to take something from both those games. They may take 4 points out of 6 from those two games.
I think that feels on the fairly likely when it comes to the realm of chance there. Yeah, there would have been big games there for Portadown. They're sitting above them. Will they go for it? Because that's a team who I think could easily drop down. But in turn, you give them 2 wins over the next couple of weeks. They're on what, 34. You might say they're home and hose. So
Yeah.
it's a really significant couple of weeks for both teams realistically. Linfield against Ballymena, you hate when just the computer puts it up that way. It's hard to really say one way or the other. I think Linfield will win out in the league here, but it's just a total repeat. All depends on what happens on Tuesday as well, or Wednesday, of
Wednesday,
course.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's I can sort of see that a lot of those games, Peter, over the years as well, have followed a sort of a theme. Ballymena have sort of put up a gutsy, a resolute, disciplined display, and Linfield tend to knock one in around about 15 minutes from the end and win 1-0, and it could be that sort of scenario again this time around.
Glenavon, Cliftonville. I back Glenavon here. I'm going to say 2-0.
Well, they have. I think we've seen their best chance. Glenavon is at Moorview Park. They've picked up all their points there. They'll be sort of roared on by their fans. The fans have been through a lot this season. Cliftonville, the great enigma at the minute. It seems, Peter, that any time over the past couple of seasons, any time that I have come onto your podcast, I'm always talking about Jim Magilton having some sort of rebuilding job to do. And quite often it's been sort of between seasons in the summer where they lose key players. This time around, they're sort of losing key players in January, which is even harder to replace. If you think about that, the central defensive trio, put them together: Oren Casey, Johnny Addis, Jack Keeney. That was formidable. All of a sudden, within the space of a few days, you take away 2/3 of that triumvirate, and you're really
Relying
struggling
on
to
a
replace them.
16-year-old
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
yeah, and McGarry, as much I think is good. Yeah, not good. So do you kind of feeling there's something in the water there for Glenavon to do
I
it?
I think Glenavon, I think Michael O'Connor will see that as a big opportunity, and I will go along with yourself. I'll back Glenavon to win there.
I think it'll be close enough, but I do think Glenavon, they find it difficult down at Stagmore Park, but I think they should be able to go down and get their goals to claim 3 points and bring that back up to East Belfast on Saturday. Are you in a similar mindset?
Yeah, again, Rodney will be looking for a big response for Dungannon after that sort of humbling. I think the humbled was the word that he used to that defeat at Carrick. Important game for both teams in that sense, and that's why I think that might well be sort of a scoring draw, possibly 1-1, 2-2, something like that.
I feel like I'm the man that always has a sneaky feeling about a draw or as if there's going to be a little bit of a shock. But Lauren going to Crusaders and Coleraine going to Bangor, I favour the full time and I favour the favourites in both those games.
Yeah, certainly. From what I've seen of Larne in recent weeks, and I've watched them quite a bit over the sort of Christmas New Year period. I think Larne are sort of going along just nicely. There's nothing really sort of rocking the boat too much for them. They're winning games. They're winning games quite comfortably. I was really impressed with them, Peter, the night when they beat Coleraine. I thought even before it took them a fair while in the game to score. It took that sort of Andy Ryan coming off the bench impact. But I thought, when they did score, and they didn't just settle for 1-0 that night. They went on and scored another couple, and they were very impressive. Thought they were impressive against Bangor on Friday night, just keeping things ticking over nicely. Again, Coleraine, the memories of that trip to Bangor earlier on in the season where they came back with egg in their face. I would imagine Rory Higgins will be imploring them that there's no repeat of that there, and I don't think they'll slip up a second time. As impressive as Bangor have been at home, I think Coleraine will go there and win 2-0.
They might huff and puff and I might struggle to the end, but I think you're right. I back the bandsiders there. But Mr. Alexander, that's your lot. Plenty of things covered, both on and off the pitch. Good luck this weekend, whatever game you are sent to, and make sure you wrap up nice and warm.
Thank you, Peter. Take care.
Sometimes I'm just glad that I record this podcast when I do, because sometimes news just pops up and you get to react to it rather than, recording it a day or hours before it happens and then you're stuck. It's like the biggest news story in ages. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for listening. If you did, maybe just skip to the end to see what I would say here. Not much. Except, of course, if you want to follow this podcast, please do. It's Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and TikTok as well. Not that I'm posting. It's Kicking Match and all those things. Of course, subscribe to your podcast player, be it Apple Podcasts, be it Spotify. You can hit a wee button and follow/subscribe, and it means you get a little notification when I put up this podcast. I'll see you next week. Have a good one.